Hey, how's it going everyone? This is Brendan Bias from tutorcheck.com and welcome to another Walkthrough Wednesday. For this week's tutorial, I had a user send me a message asking if I would, do him the honors of recreating a tutorial that was done by DennisDesigns.com. And this is the tutorial right here. And in my opinion, this tutorial was actually really well done. It's got a cool effect, and most of the steps are laid out well enough for people to follow. However, it is a little bit on the old side. It was created in March 31st of 2009, so it is a little bit dated, and the effect itself looks really nice. So I figured I would go ahead and oblige that user and do this here recreation of that tutorial. So if you want to check out the original or access the links to some of the textures that I'm going to be using, just take a look in the description and I'll have all the links that you need right there, all nice and easy for you guys to access. So the result that I had is a little bit different because, I kind of like to throw my own little spin on things, and of course, differences in Photoshop CS6 and whatever version of Photoshop was released in 2009 are going to yield in different results. So this is what I ended up getting right here, and I think my favorite difference between my version and his version is the result of the background. I talked to Eli about this. It really looks like it's like a futuristic road that's kind of like degrading a little bit. Like, for example, it's like a slab of concrete for a road, but it's kind of deteriorating, so you can see some of like the metal mesh that was kind of mixed in with it when it was laid down. I don't know, it's just kind of what him and I thought of when we were looking at this. So we decided that it was a kind of a cool name to call this the concrete mesh tutorial, rather than create an awesome background using patterns. Ooh, no one cares about that. Concrete mesh, that seems pretty cool, so we're going to stick with that. Okay, so let's get into the tutorial here. The first thing that we need to do is actually to create the pattern that we use to set up the mesh in the background. So let's go ahead and make our new document here, and we can call this mesh pattern just so we can know what tab this is. And let's do a 100 by 100 document with a 72 ppi resolution. And of course, color mode RGB, we'll just keep that as it is, and a white background. So let's hit OK, and I'm going to hit Control or Command 0 to zoom into the canvas size here to make it nice and easy to see what we're doing. And the first thing we're going to do is double click this background layer over here, and we will just name this BG, who cares. And we are going to apply a color overlay on this, and we're just going to do a CCC for the color number there, and hit OK, and hit OK again. And next up, we're going to throw in the circles to represent the holes of the mesh. So we'll go off to the side over here and select our ellipse tool. So something that you should notice is that this next part is a lot easier to do in Photoshop CS6 rather than CS5, CS4, or further back than that. Although you can still do it, but the reason that it's easier to do in CS6 is because when you click and drag, it will actually tell you the size of the shape that you're creating as you're drawing it. And that's really handy when you're trying to create a circle that has to be a specific size. In this case, we want to hold our shift key so that way it's a perfect 1-to-1 ratio for the width and height. And we are going to create a 10 pixel by 10 pixel circle right here in our document. And if you're in an earlier version of Photoshop, that's going to be a little bit harder to figure out. So let me just demonstrate how you can do that real quick. So let me zoom in like up to the left-hand side over here. One thing that you can do is, while holding the shift key down, is to just count the pixels out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and that should, get you a circle as well. Or another option is to go off to the left-hand side, grab your rectangular marquee tool, and set the style from normal to fixed size. Or you can just kind of open up the information panel on the left-hand side. That should be pretty handy to have as well. And you can set the fixed size to 10 pixels by 10 pixels and just click and drag and make a box somewhere, and then just set up some rulers and set those rulers to the edges of the marquee. And then that way you should be able to just go straight back to your ellipse tool and create a circle. Let me move that back over. That should fit perfectly within those rulers, and voila, you have a 10 pixel by 10 pixel circle. So it's possible to create these circles, perfectly within older versions of Photoshop. However, it is easier to do in Photoshop CS6. So now that you have your circle of choice on your document, here's what we're going to do. Simply just place this circle using your direct selection tool, or sorry, not your direct selection tool, but your path selection tool on the left-hand side, and just place it somewhere in the middle-ish area of your document. Doesn't really matter where. And we're going to change the fill of this ellipse to a slightly darker gray, which is 333, and you'll have that nice dark gray color, and we can hit OK. And we're also going to give this ellipse an inner shadow. So let's go to Effects, and we'll go to Inner Shadow. And you can do whatever you want here, of course, since it's your project, you can experiment as you wish. But I'm going to set the opacity to 100% and change the distance and the size to 2 pixels. So that way we have this nice, harsh little inner shadow on the inside there. And so let's hit OK, close up the information, and move on to the next step. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more to get a better look at what's going on here. And this step could be potentially confusing to some of those viewers out there, so I'll try and take this nice and slow. With your circle selected, again using your path selection tool, hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, or the Option key if you're on a Mac, and click and drag the circle upward while holding the Shift key, and that should create a duplicate of that circle while still having it in line with the original. And the placement of this is going to be pretty important, so pay attention to that as well. To have 1 pixel gap between these two circles, and then we'll nudge this circle to the left 7 pixels. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so once again, we want to create another duplicate of this circle. So while holding the Alt and the Shift key, I'm going to click and drag this circle over to the middle, so that way it lines up with that original circle once again. And then a second time, I will nudge this over, but to the right, 7 pixels. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So there you go, we've got this little Mickey Mouse of dots going on here. And the next thing to do is to take these 2 ellipses and move them down below the original circle. So while holding the Shift key, let's select our top left circle, so that way both of them are selected. And then while holding Alt and Shift, we'll click and drag these suckers downward until they are 1 pixel away from the original circle. And so this should be nice and swell for what we're trying to accomplish. We've got a 4 pixel gap between these 2 circles on the top and bottom, and we've also got a 1 pixel gap between the single circle in the middle and the 2 that are above and below it. So once you've got that, we are ready to make our selection. So go off to the left-hand side and select your rectangular marquee tool. And of course, make sure that your feather is at 0 pixels and your style is set to normal. So with this rectangular marquee, we are going to click and drag a selection like so. So let me move this right about there. So what this should do is go through the centers of the top and bottom circles. And it should be easy to notice because the edge points right here are 2 pixels wide, and so the middle of the selection should go straight through each of those pixels on the top, bottom, right, and left. So once you've got that, let's go ahead and zoom out just a little bit so you can see that a little bit better. And now we can go up to Edit and choose Define Pattern. Now, I realize that in some older versions of Photoshop, this option will not be available. And so to fix that, if that happens to any of you out there, close out of the Edit menu, go off to the right-hand side where your layers are, right-click on a layer, and choose either, if I could find it, there we go, choose either Merge Visible or Flatten Image. Either one of those will work just fine. I'm going to use Flatten Image. So now we should be able to go back to Edit and click Define Pattern. And then, of course, you can just rename this to Mesh Pattern or whatever the heck you want. But since I already have this pattern saved, I'm just going to go ahead and click cancel. So now that you have your pattern set up, we can get along with the actual project. So let's go to File and make a new document and name this our Concrete Mesh Project. And for the size of this, I'm going to make it 1920 by 1080, seeing as that is my favorite resolution. And I will set the background contents to white as usual and hit OK. So the first thing we're going to do with this new document is to apply that pattern to our background. So let's double click our background layer, and we can name this mesh to make it nice and easy to remember. And let's go to Effects and add our pattern overlay, and then click the little drop down arrow for your pattern and select that new mesh pattern that we just created. Now, this isn't the only thing that I want to do to this background here, so let's go ahead and add in an inner shadow, and let's put the distance down to 0. Let's put up the size to somewhere around 100 or 120, and let's also put up the choke just a little bit as well. Maybe we'll put that to 20 as well. Again, since it's your project, you can use whatever settings look, right and dandy for you. So just kind of experiment with that as you please. So after that, let's go ahead and hit OK. And now I think is a good time to apply the texture onto the mesh. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the texture that I chose here. And I'll provide the link for this in the description so you guys can find it yourselves. And all I'm going to do is right click, copy the image, and I'll move this tab out of the way. And so now here in Photoshop, I should be able to just paste it with Control or Command V, and voila, we have a nice little texture here. So let's do a little bit of easy editing onto our new texture layer. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to Image, go to Adjustments, and I'm going to choose Desaturate. But, if you like your shortcuts, that could be Control-Shift-U or Command-Shift-U to apply that desaturation there. So next up, I'm going to invert this by hitting Control or Command-I, and that will invert it for us. And I will also change the blend mode of this texture to darken. There we go. So now we've got a nice texture here, but I do want to move it around a little bit differently. So I'm going to zoom out and bring up the transform tool by hitting Control or Command T. And let's rotate this while holding the Shift key. And we'll put this around right about there and hit the check mark up top to commit that transformation. Now, I do want to apply a little bit of contrast to this texture to make it pop a little bit better. So I'm going to open up my adjustments panel off to the right hand side. If you don't have that, you can open it with Window and go into Adjustments, nice and easy. And we're going to apply a curves adjustment layer. And before we do any tweaking at all, let's go ahead and turn this into a clipping mask by clicking this icon right here next to the little eyeball with an arrow next to it. So for the contrasting bit, let's keep it nice and simple. I'm going to add a point in the lower midtones area right here. Just kind of put this down a little bit, not too drastically far. And then we'll go up to the highlights and add a much brighter point. And we'll put that right up there. So we've got a really weird S shape. And let's do a before and after. Pretty sweet. Okay, so now that our background is set up, we can start adding in the little box in the middle to contain the PS logo, as I would like to call it. So I want to put this sucker right smack dab in the middle of the document. So the easy way to do that is to add in some guides. So let's bring up our rulers by hitting Control or Command R on our keyboard. And I'm going to click and drag from the top ruler on down until this ruler snaps at the middle, which in this case is 540 pixels, and we'll let go. And we'll click and drag from the left-hand ruler to the middle of the document, where it will snap at 960 pixels. And so now we have these guides to show the middle of our document. So let's go back and grab our rectangle tool off the left-hand side over here. And before we make our rectangle, let's go up top and make sure we have a good fill color. So let's do, let's try 999 for the color of our box here, and we'll hit OK. And of course, we'll close up that little box up there. And let's click and drag from the center of the guides down into the right while holding Alt and Shift. And we'll make this box between maybe 600 and 700 pixels. So right around there looks like a good size to me. And I'm going to click and drag another new box while holding Alt and Shift. And let's put this somewhere around right there. Looks like a good size to me. And this time, let's change the fill to a much darker gray, like 222. Whoops, sorry, I forgot a 2. Go back here. 222. Thank you very much. Much better. Having these guides in the middle is handy, but we really don't need them anymore. So I'm going to hide the guides by hitting Control semicolon. Or, you know, if you're on a Mac, that would be Command semicolon. So I want to go ahead and add in the text inside our box here. So let's bring up our text tool by hitting the letter T, and you'll notice that the text tool right now is a little bit different. If you have your text tool within this box, it will have a circle around it rather than a box. And if you were to click inside this box and start, typing something, you'll notice that it's going to severely limit you on what you can type in here. It's going to limit how many characters you can have because it's constraining these characters so that they're only inside this box, and that's going to be kind of annoying. So instead of just clicking inside this box, we're going to hold down the Shift key, and you'll notice that it changes to a box rather than a circle around the icon, and if you click, you should be able to start typing in whatever the heck you want. Now, of course, in my case, I'm going to do a capital P and a lowercase s. And because I forgot to mention this, the font that I'm using is called Ubuntu, and I'm using the bold version of that at 650 points with a sharp anti-aliasing method. And while I'm doing this, let's select both of these layers, and we'll go to the color and set that to B8, 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 and we'll hit OK. And another thing is that when you type out these letters, by default, they're going to be a little spaced apart. They'll look more like this. So what I did is I went to this VA value, which is the tracking value, and I set that to -120. And in case some of you don't have this character panel, you can bring it up once again by going to Window and going to Character. Alright, so everything seems pretty spick and span right now. We've got our slightly gray text, we've got them squished together, and they look like they're appropriate size. So now we can go up top and click the little check mark to confirm our text here. And the next thing I want to do is make sure that my text is centered within the rectangle. So to do that, I'm going to go select my Move tool off to the left-hand side over here. And with your mouse hovering over the thumbnail for rectangle or rectangle tool, it doesn't matter, each one should work. Hold down the Control key if you're on a PC or the Command key if you're on a Mac, and give that thumbnail a click, and it should turn that rectangle into a selection. So now with our PS text selected, we can go up top. You'll notice that we have these 6 icons up here, and if you give the second icon and the 5th icon a click, it should center the text nice and perfectly within that box there. So now we can deselect that by hitting Control or Command D. And next up, I want to go ahead and add in a red fill for the letter P. So to do that, let's go select our Rectangle 2 layer, and let's go back to our Rectangle tool off to the left-hand side, and let's click and drag a box that just fits around that fill for the letter P. And so now we need to go up to the fill and change that to whatever color that we want to do. In my case, I want to change this to a slightly dark red color. And if you hit OK, that should apply. And there we go, we've got this cool little filler inside the letter P. So now that we've got our basics set up for this, this little logo for Photoshop here, I want to add in some styling and stuff to kind of make it pop a little bit better. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to Rectangle 1, and let's add in a bevel and emboss. And for this, I'll just dumb down the depth to about 80%, and I'll go ahead and also add in an inner glow, and I'll just make that white and call it good. What the freak? I do not need Photoshop online help. What the freak is going on here? Holy crap, that was weird. Huh. Okay, so ignoring that randomness that just happened, now we have an inner shadow, or sorry, not an inner shadow, but an inner glow. And next up, I'll go ahead and add a drop shadow. And for this, I'm going to set the distance to 0. And I'm just going to use a random size and spread that I think looks pretty good. Let's size the sucker up. Maybe put up the opacity to make it a little bit darker. That's looking a little bit too large for my liking, so let's put this down a little bit. And I swear, if there's a "that's what she said" joke in the comments after they see this part of the video, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just, I guess I just gave you guys a freebie right there. Okay, so let's hit OK and commit those layer styles. And if you want to, you can kind of do the same thing for the PS text. You can add in a drop shadow and maybe give it a bevel, but I really don't like how that looks, so I'm just going to hit cancel. You guys are free to experiment with that as you choose. However, I do want to have a nice texture on top of this. But now that I think about it, let's actually do that a little bit later. I just remembered that we need to have a nice little highlight on the top of our logo here. So let's go ahead and go off to the left-hand side and go back to our ellipse tool over here. And for this, let's click and drag an ellipse that kind of encircles the bottom portion of the logo. And let's put that somewhere around right there. Is looking pretty good. And I'm just going to put the fill down to 0 just so I don't have to see the ellipse here. And what we're going to do here is to make a selection out of rectangle 1. So let's go to the thumbnail of rectangle 1 and give that a control click or command click. And then for the thumbnail of ellipse 1, let's hold Control and Alt at the same time. That would be Command and Option if you're on a Mac. And give that thumbnail a click, and that will subtract that selection from the square selection that we just made. So now we can just get rid of ellipse 1, and we'll make a new layer, and we can call this layer Highlight. And with Highlight selected, let's go to our brush tool by hitting the letter B. And I'm just going to add in a nice little spotlight here at the very top, and then I'll hit Control D to deselect. So if you want to, and you think that the highlight is a little bit too intense, we can just put down the opacity just a little bit, so that way it's more of a nice little accent rather than an overwhelming highlight. You know, once again, it's up to you. So going back to adding a texture to this, let's select our original texture layer and duplicate that by hitting Control or Command J. And seeing as texture copy is now the one that's having the curves applied to it, we can select the original texture layer and bring it up top. And we're going to change the blend mode of the texture to overlay. And you'll notice that now this is being applied to the entire canvas. And some of you may like that, some of you may not. Personally, I just want this to be applied strictly to the rectangle here. So once again, I'm going to control click the thumbnail for rectangle 1. Again, that would be command click if you're on a Mac. And I'm going to apply a layer mask to the texture layer. So now it should only be applied to our box here. So one thing that you can do if you are interested in moving around the texture a little bit is to click the little chain link that is between the texture and its mask, and that will make it so that you can select the texture itself and move around the original texture without moving the mask, which is pretty handy if you want to, you know, just kind of move things around and get a different perspective on things. And so that is actually about everything that you need to do for this tutorial. However, you can take it one step further and add a soft yellow hue to the overall image. So an easy way to go about doing that is by going back to your adjustments panel, and we are going to add in a photo filter. And personally, I like changing this from warming filter 85 and changing that to warming filter 81. And I don't know why, I just think it looks a little bit nicer because it's a slightly lighter shade of yellow, and we can even go down and lower the density to like 20%, so that way it's just a slight little addition to our image here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this little masterpiece that we just created. Alright, looking good. So I just wanted to thank you guys for watching this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, just give it a thumbs up or leave a comment. And, you know, as always, I'm open to some criticism, some ideas for future tutorials, so if you have any ideas, just feel free to send me a message here on YouTube or by emailing me at brandon@chichicheckit.com. Either one works. So once again, leave some comments, share with your friends, and, you know, let me know what you think of this, because, you know, feedback is always appreciated. So that's about all I have for you guys, and I will see you suckers next Wednesday or Tuesday, depending on what happens. Alright, peace out, guys.